I do want to thank members of the press who are here. We wanted to, and I want to thank my colleagues, certainly, specifically my Deputy Leader, Senator Lanza, and our finance ranker and sort of point person on the budget, whether it's budget hearings, whether it's the One House, whether it's conceptual parameters of agreement. He is sort of the point person, and that is Senator O'Mara, as well as all my colleagues who are here. So initially, I had called this because I wanted to talk about the agreement the governor talked about the other day, and we certainly will. But here we are now, going on, 36 hours after she made that announcement, and we still don't have any budget bills. We haven't seen anything. All we have is what she has put forward in the press. And so, to put that a little in perspective, we have $8 billion increase in spending year over year. $229 billion last year was the budget number. I realize that can move a little through the year, but that was the fiscal plan. And then this year it's $237 billion. So $8 billion. So it would be natural for New Yorkers to say, I must be getting $8 billion worth of better government, of more services. And the truth is, when you look at poll after poll, and you hear what New Yorkers are concerned about, it's first and foremost, it's affordability, it's the cost of living in New York State. Whether that's inflationary, whether it's taxes, whether it's regulations, the reality is New York State is a very high cost state, and it is getting more expensive, and that is the biggest concern for most families across the state, from Long Island to Western New York and everywhere in between. How am I going to continue to afford to buy groceries, to pay for gas, to heat my home, to buy a home, to stay in my home, to send my kid to school, to save for college, to save for retirement, and then get the heck out of here? I mean, that is literally, these are the thoughts that go through a lot of working families and a lot of average New Yorkers' minds. This budget, by spending $8 billion more, does not do anything to solve that, because if it was the case, we would have solved it a long time ago. If spending was the answer, if just spending money was the answer, then New York State, as I've said before, would be the most affordable state. Because if this budget goes through at 237, that would be, I think, that would be a $73 billion increase in the last 6 years. So since the Republicans lost the majority, since the Democrats took over a majority, that'd be a $73 billion increase. That is larger than 37 other states' total budget. Just the increase. Just the increase. Now, yeah, you're going to say, well, that includes small states like Delaware and Rhode Island. Sure it does. But it also includes states like Texas and Florida. And it just, it has just gotten so ridiculous that we are spending this kind of money and it's not solving the issue. We're not solving the issue of affordability. We're certainly not solving the issue on crime. We have a late budget in part because the Democrats couldn't agree to include increased penalties for thieves who assault retail workers. Not who are just stealing. It's not bad enough they're stealing goods, but these are people who assault workers, assault people who are making minimum wage, assault people who are, trying to put themselves through college, assault someone who's working at night after they've done their homework, they go to high school, assault a single mom who's working a second job at a bodega or at a pharmacy. They could not agree that that was a good thing. In fact, the Speaker said increased penalties don't work. And I would say something to the Speaker on that is, first of all, they obviously do work, and I'll tell you why. Because since we have moved into this soft on crime policy, we've seen an uptick in criminal activity, in quality of life crimes. The reason we've seen an increase is because there's no consequence. So if there's an increase in criminal activity without a consequence, that means with consequences would come a decrease in criminal activity. But the bigger issue to me is, look, I want that person to fix their life that goes to jail. But if they don't, that's on them. we hold them accountable, not because I'm trying to necessarily rehab them. We hold them accountable because that's what law-abiding citizens demand and deserve, that there are consequences for your action. If you rob and steal and assault, there are consequences for that. If you fix yourself after those consequences, good for you. And there's plenty of resources out there to help you get your life back on track. But the notion that we only serve penalties if we can show that everybody reforms themselves, what a joke. What a complete joke. That is not why I don't send a murderer to jail hoping that he fixes himself. He goes to jail because he killed someone. That isn't, let's stop pretending that's the goal. That's certainly what we hope for and work towards. But there is a accountability and justice component here that has nothing to do with you fixing yourself. It's about justice for the victim. It's our way in society of showing there's a consequence for your actions. And if you go into a retail store and steal and assault somebody, there's going to be a consequence for your action. Hopefully that is in this final budget. We'll see what the details are there. There's certainly $2.4 billion. What was not debated at all was $2.4 billion for illegal aliens. We would have passed the budget early if that was the only thing in it, because that was the one thing the Democrats completely agreed on. And so Newsweek had an article, and Katie can get you all the details on this. But there was an article put forward a couple weeks ago that a family of four with a 50%, assuming a 50% disabled veteran as the head of the household, they get less than a family of four of illegal aliens who are here in New York today. If you don't think that that's a problem, if you think that that's the way it should be, then turn this off right now, because you're not going to like what I have to say the rest of it. That is what galls New Yorkers, that we spend $237 billion of their tax money. The only people who pay this are people who pay taxes in New York. And don't tell me that someone who is here without papers, without a job, without legal status is paying taxes. I'm not talking about the sales tax they might pay with the gift card that they got from us for groceries. I'm talking about payroll taxes. I'm talking about income taxes. I'm talking about property taxes. They don't pay them. How could they? They're not legal. They're not expected to pay them. But they're also not expected to be able to stay here, but they do get to stay here under New York sanctuary policies, and New Yorkers are footing the bill. And don't tell me that's not a part of the increase. $8 billion over the last 2 years, over $4 billion for the illegal alien crisis that we have created through sanctuary policies with no requirement on the city of New York or the governor to change those sanctuary policies. That is what this budget is about. And then, of course, we'll talk about housing. Housing. We got a housing crisis. This plan, as put forward by the governor, will do nothing to solve the housing crisis, which is a lack of construction of new homes, whether it's upstate or in the city of New York. Now, there's an effort, I know, 421A extension I forget the other number, 483 or 485X. But everyone I've talked to in the city says it will be years, if ever, before those are constructed. But guess what? All the good cause elements, they go into effect immediately. Who is going to who in New York is going to say, I'm going to build new units that we're going to rent out with these new good cause stipulations? Automatic lease renewals. I mean, if you're a small landlord, why would you ever get into that business? Certainly upstate, it's going to have a deleterious effect on the landlord, on the, that business model of owning a couple properties and renting them out or leasing them out. There's no question about it. And I think it's incredibly dubious. The governor's throwing around a lot of numbers here, money. I really think it's going to be real dubious as to whether or not we see the construction of new homes and new units at the rate that we need them. And the reason I say that is because this state has thrown around billions of dollars over the years for economic development programs and all kinds of things to attract people here. And it really hasn't worked. And the reason it really hasn't worked is because at the same time we do that, we pass laws and regulations that absolutely undermine the very the reason we're putting out the money. So you're putting out money to build new homes and new apartments in New York City, but at the same time you're saying, but if you come and live in this, you're going to be here for life, essentially. Essentially, that is what the practical reality is. And so this is not going to solve the affordable issue, the housing issue, and this is what New Yorkers, this is what passes. And of course, all of this is being, these last details. I mean, the governor's out there the other day talking about this by herself, which in my experience is a bad sign. I mean, it's supposed to be 3 people in a room. It's 1 person at a podium. And then you got the 2 leaders doing this in cover of darkness, no bills, and they have the gall, and I will say this, they have the gall to tell my conference, well, we're going to give you drafts and pieces of it, and we're going to hope to be voting tomorrow. We're not voting on anything until I see a bill, a final bill that can't be changed. Now, I know this morning, and I'm going to turn over to my colleague, Senator O'Mara, but I saw this morning that there was a cyber attack. I know enough to know that cyber attack is a broad term and can mean a lot of different things, as I'm sure members of the media know from covering different cyber attacks, right? A cyber attack is not a cyber attack, is not a cyber attack. It can be very different things. There was a cyber attack on bill drafting. And yet, the comments from the Speaker and the Majority Leader are that it will not impede their ability of bill drafting to do their job. Well, if that's the case, then we should have bills drafted. Yet, you know, the public comment is everything's good, nothing to see here, that's kosher, and I get that sometimes that is, you don't want to tell the bad guys that maybe they've been successful or what they've accomplished, but at the same time, they're telling me, given the circumstances, we may not have bills for you for quite some time. So I just think they need to be more honest with the public, or at least with me, about where things are as far as producing bills so that my members, elected state senators, representing millions of New Yorkers, can actually have a real debate and a real discussion and a real vote on a real bill. We're not going to do the Nancy Pelosi school here where we pass it and then we figure out what's in it. We're going to know what's in it before we pass it, before we vote on it, and we're going to make sure that they have to answer for what's in it and what's not in it. And so, very frustrated, very disappointed that here we are Wednesday afternoon. We're gavelled out for the day, so you know what that means. We're not voting on any bills today, which means now we're until tomorrow, and we'll see what happens tomorrow. I expect the next several days to be very lengthy, and you know, hopefully we start to get real bills with real substance, and we get an idea of where we're spending $237 billion other than the governor's press conference. That is not a budget. That is not the parameters of a deal. That's a press conference. And that's great. Maybe that's all going to be in there. But until we have real bills in front of this conference, you know, we're going to be here for a little longer. And with that, I will turn over to my colleague, someone who's no stranger to all these issues and the process of the budget, and that is our finance ranker, Senator O'Mara.
Thank you, Leader. Wish we had more to report for you today on the status of the budget. We're still in the dark here in Planet Albany, a planet where you really can't make this stuff up. You know, we're 2 days now after the governor came out with an announcement of a budget agreement that clearly was not a budget agreement because the 2 leaders of the houses were not with her. She provided no specifics in her presentation. And then she came back out to talk to you all in the press, and there was a lot of squirming going on with the questions that were asked about details of many of the major agreement points that she had just outlined, that there clearly is no agreement. Now we're dealing with a cyber attack that's apparently shut down bill drafting. You know, if we had an on-time budget, the cyber attack wouldn't be such a big deal right now because we're supposed to be on vacation for the next couple of weeks out of session. Probably time to resolve that. But no, here we are in Planet Albany under a cyber attack and bill drafting with a budget that's 17 days late, with a governor's proclaimed agreement that clearly is not an agreement, that comes out saying that she's agreed with the leaders they're going to spend $4 billion more than the $4 billion she already added on in her executive budget, $8 billion more. What are the details of that $4 billion? When are we going to find that out? When are New Yorkers going to find that out? Leader Ord has said, we won't be voting on the budget until we have ample time to review these bills. But it's been 2 days since the governor announced this agreement, and we have no details on that. The media has no details to report on that. I can assure you that when these budget bills come out and they get to bill drafting or whatever it's going to be through, whether they're going to come by carrier pigeon or we're going to go back to the stacks of bills on our desks, which will be a little nostalgic. But we in the legislature are probably going to have less than 2 days to review them and pass them with messages of convenience from the governor. It's no way to be dealing with a $237 billion budget. We deserve more time as elected officials to be reviewing this. The taxpayers of New York deserve more time to provide feedback to all the members of the legislature on the details that are in this budget, which we know really nothing of. All of the major issues that have been talked about for a couple months now, we still have no details on. Good cause eviction, Tier 6, you name it, consumer-directed care, just a variety of issues that are out there that are major issues impacting millions of New Yorkers that deserve to know what's in the budget. They deserve time to provide feedback to all of us to determine how we proceed on this budget. We represent millions of New Yorkers, but all New Yorkers, represented not just by us in this conference, but the whole legislature, they all deserve time to see this budget, time to respond, time to let us know their concerns and whether they're supportive or not supportive of this. Yet, we have a proposal now that's undefined, that's spending $4 billion more than what was initially proposed, at $237 billion. It's an astronomical amount that, as I said, we're going to get messages of convenience from the governor to be able to rush these through before anybody really has time to push back on it. And it's very frustrating from where we stand. It's frustrating for my constituents. They want answers. And we're going to work as diligently as we can once presented with these on getting these answers and trying to get public feedback for the process, whatever we can get in the short amount of time we have. So with that, thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your efforts and your time on this, and no doubt Senator O'Mara will play a central role for us on the floor once we actually have actual budget language. I know Senator Krueger is looking very much forward to that. But at this time, I just want to call up our deputy leader, someone who will no doubt also be on the floor hours upon end, managing our floor operation, and someone who knows many of these issues in and out, both in the budget, Article 7, fiscal, and that is our deputy leader, Senator Andrew Lanza.
Thank you, Leader Ort, Senator O'Mara, my Republican colleagues, members of the press. This is that fun time of year that we typically come together and talk about the chaos that is the budget process here in New York. You've heard from both the leader and Senator O'Mara about the process, and I think the way the left, our Democratic colleagues in both houses, and the governor is handling this process is indicative of the way they think about the people of New York. And sadly, when this budget ultimately passes, we're really going to know a lot more about how they view New Yorkers. And sadly, we know that they believe that they have the right to control your lives, your homes, your kids' education, and just about everything else that you do. They really look at New Yorkers with disdain. Leader Ort talked about the fact that one thing we do know, it seems, is that this budget is going to spend $8 billion more than last year, and last year's budget was just ridiculous. What we have here in New York is runaway spending. And the only result of that is that more New Yorkers are going to be forced to run away from New York. you know, we're past the breaking point here. Every year I hear folks in the media and pundits talk about who are the winners and who are the losers after the budget is passed. There's one thing that is for certain. The losers are the hard-working New Yorkers, the hard-working families, the businesses across New York that pay the bill. They will certainly be the losers here. And that's sad. It's unsustainable. So who are the winners? Leader Ort touched on this. If you're a person who lives in another country and you're looking to cut barbed wire, violate American sovereignty, make your way to New York, this budget says, come on down. You're welcome. And we're going to pick the pocket of hard-working New Yorkers, and we're going to give you a free home, free iPhones, free housing. And when we say give you free housing, it means we are taking the leftist Democrats, the governor, who talks about a housing shortage. It's really laughable, because at the same time, outside the other side of her mouth, she's taking housing and homes away from New York citizens and giving them at New York expense to people who just came here unlawfully. So there's no wonder that after this budget, and no one ought to be surprised, when this budget is passed, the so-called migrant crisis is going to be exacerbated, because people around the world aren't stupid. They know that when you have a governor who refuses to pass this conference's law that says the end of sanctuary state, sanctuary city, they know that when you have a government led by leftist Democrats that says to a migrant who comes here and commits a crime, don't worry, we'll obstruct justice, we'll open the back door after you're arrested, and we'll say, hurry up, we'll cover for you, we're not going to cooperate with the feds. Go down to Georgia or anywhere else and commit more crimes, murders. People say, hey, New York, that's the place to be if you are a would-be criminal, if you want everything in life for free. The leader talked about so-called good cause. The only result of that, it will cause terrible results in the state of New York. Good cause will cause terrible things to happen. Could you imagine if you're a homeowner in New York? Everything already costs too much. You're working 2 jobs, and you're barely making it. You're barely paying your mortgage. There's no protection, there's no cap on the increase of your costs. New York City tax assessor says, we're going to raise your property taxes by $3,000 a year. Your income tax is up. Everything in the store costs more. It costs more to do everything that you need to do to live in this state and in my city. There's no cap on those costs for you. But the bottom line is, you don't have control over your own home. Now Governor Hochul is going to control your house and your home. And that's un-American. It's violative of everything we believe as a free nation. And this is what they're doing, because they despise freedom. And they despise, in many ways, the hardworking people that really make New York, to the extent that it is still livable, livable. So that's what's coming down the pike. Senator Ort and I, we laughed last year. Laugh is the wrong word. But it's sort of, we heard we got a history lesson today from one of our colleagues about Constitution Day. We learned all about the New York State Constitution. Noticeably absent from that discussion was the fact that you need to pass a budget by April 1st. And if you don't, New York can't pay its bills, and can't move forward. And so that speaks to the process. They couldn't care less. And as I was about to say, Senator Ort said, we know it's got to happen, but it's like that asteroid heading toward us. We know it's coming. We wish we could stop it, but it's going to get here, and when it does, it's really going to wreak havoc for the people of the state of New York. So sorry to not have good news, but all we know is this. And Senator Ort really, I think, drives this point home every single day. When they say they're going to spend $8 billion more, all that really means is it's going to cost $8 billion more for New Yorkers to live in New York. This budget is going to make New York less safe and more expensive than any state in the union, and that is a lapse of, I think, the responsibility that the people who come here are supposed to uphold.
Thank you, Senator Lanza, and to my colleague, Senator O'Mara, as well. And he's right. I said it the other day, so many people today are spending more on things, but they believe, and in some cases, they are getting less. They're not getting more burger. They're not getting more service. They're not getting a better airline experience. All these things have gone up. The gas still powers the car the same way, but all of these things have gone up, and in some cases, the service has not, the quality has not, and in some cases, the quality and the service have gone down. That, to me, is emblematic of what we're doing here. We're going to spend $8 billion more. It's going to cost New Yorkers $8 billion more to run their government. But are they getting $8 billion worth of new services? Are we getting $8 billion better? They think that every dollar means we're doing more. And maybe we're doing more, but as Senator Lanza said, for who? Who are the winners? And he listed who the winners were. And they're not most of our constituents. They're not the people that I would go and ask for their vote. And that, to me, is the real shame of this, is the people we ask to support all of us are not, by and large, the people who are going to look at this budget and say, it fixed my issue, helped me out, now I'm going to stay. Quite the opposite, I think. So with that, we will see. I'm sure we'll be talking more about this, but certainly happy to take any questions, at least on where our conference is or what we know at this point. Karen?
Is there any chance that the legislature could go on vacation without doing the budget? We seem to be following today.
Karen, I think anything is possible here, right? And certainly the worse scenario you can put up, the more possible I think sometimes it is. But I think it actually has like an inverse relationship. But I would tell you that our conference, and I've said this, we've said this, I've said it, they will tell you I've said it in the room when it's just us. There is no way, it would be an absolute embarrassment to the governor and to the legislative leaders that we would leave here to go on vacation without approving a final spending plan. There are school districts, and I'll just use one back home. I don't represent it. It's adjacent. It's in Erie County, West Seneca. They laid off 47 people the other night because they have to use the governor's number as their budget. Their budget has to go before the public, and there's a process that has to happen on certain dates. So they can't just wait for us to get back from wherever we're going or back from home to pass a budget. So the idea that we would break, or even the idea that we would leave here and say, well, we'll come back maybe when we can come back next week or the week after, I think would be such a slap in the face to New Yorkers. But I really think beyond that, that would be a dereliction of duty by the governor of New York and the state legislative leaders to be able to do that. And maybe they don't have any shame. I do. I would feel shamed to go back. I'm not supposed to go anywhere the next 2 weeks. I'm going to be home in my district. Maybe I will go somewhere because I would be embarrassed to be seen amongst my constituents having no budget after and we'll get back when we get back, from our break, because it's just too stressful. This is the job. This is the job. And I know, look, there's people who are working around the clock trying to get it done. So I don't want to be flippant about that, but the reality is we have a job to do, and we should not leave Albany, the collective we, until we do it. Our conference is prepared to be here as long as it takes, because that's what I told them last week. We are going to be prepared to stay here as long as it takes until there's a budget.
Please. So, the cyber attack this morning, what are you being told? I touched on this a little bit, and will this ultimately delay the budget? The Democrat majority is saying that it won't.
Well, so let me say this. So I know from previous existences that I've had, previous positions, that normally when there's a cyber attack, you don't necessarily want to telegraph that, yes, this took out all this or this did that. That is a general, you don't want to alert, because sometimes the bad guys don't even know exactly what might have happened. And so sometimes there's a, yep, everything's fine. Behind the scenes, that might not completely be the case. So that is not an abnormal necessarily situation. But what they're telling me privately seems to be, or what they're intimating to me, is that clearly it has caused a problem. Clearly it's causing a problem because I don't have actual budget bills. Where do those come from? Bill drafting, right? I mean, and then the comment was made, well, you know, we would like a little consideration of the circumstances. Well, if it's not stopping you from doing your job, then what consideration is needed? No one was injured. Bill drafting doesn't have any personal information that I'm aware of. You know, maybe whoever did, they obviously will have, you know, pieces of legislation. Maybe that'll leak out somewhere on the dark web or something. I don't know. But, you know, it just seems to me, what are we really talking about? Now, they said there was a cyber attack on, an agency that had all, you know, social security numbers and personal information, pay records. If it was on payroll, that'd be a far different situation. The reality is, if they're saying it's not an issue, then there shouldn't be an issue. Then we should have bills soon, because the governor, she's ready to go. I bet she has those messages already lined up. But so I'm getting mixed messages, I guess. I'm hearing one thing publicly, but I'm hearing different things privately, and that makes me think, I tend to believe the private message around this place more than I do the public one sometimes, and that makes me think that it is going to impact it. What I'm trying to find out is how much. You don't have to tell, how long, because I have to communicate that to my members. How long is it going to delay it by a day, by a couple hours? We'll work with the majority. We are here to do our job, and I know this isn't their fault, but it's their responsibility. It's their responsibility to handle this, to be transparent or at least forthright about it, and we still have to get a budget done and do the people's business. We can't just say, cyber attack, here's our notes on a bill, we would ask for your consideration. Like, that's just not going to happen. I'm going to see a bill, or we're not going to be voting on it.
And is there a backup system? I know the governor touched on it in another interview this morning, that there's a way to kind of possibly work around this, but it wasn't very clear.
Yeah. Yeah. Lack of clarity is definitely on brand, but I don't know the answer to that question, because I've only been, I say only, I've been, in the time I've been in Albany in 10 years, all I know is bill drafting, whatever system is there. So if there's some other system or some backup, emergency bill drafting plan, that's something that I'm not familiar with. It's always good to have redundancies if something like this does happen. Whether or not we have that, I don't know. I'm sure we're about to find out. If there's a backup plan, we're going to know what that is pretty soon. But to my knowledge, all I know is there's bill drafting. There was a cyber attack on bill drafting, and then there was the public statement that no problem, okay? But then there seems to be a lack of real communication privately about what this means, and that tells me that it clearly is problematic in some way, shape, or form.
Next question, Alex.
I wanted to ask about foundation aid and school funding, because on Monday the governor said something to the effect of they're not going to take the whole harmless language out this year, but they are going to be studying it, and she said there will essentially be a smaller increase to foundation aid this year compared to what was anticipated. What do you know about what's happening with foundation aid? And I know your conference was very much opposed to school aid cuts, so do you consider that news to be a win?
I mean, look, I think, you'll forgive me for not doing any kind of a celebration dance until I've seen something, right? Because the devil's always in the details. I don't think the governor ever stood it. The idea that that her cuts were ever going to hold was laughable at best. And I say that straight politically. There was no way she was going to get these, and she wasn't even willing to really fight for the cuts. She sort of admitted early on, we want to have a conversation. There's other ways to start a conversation, but this was her way of starting a conversation around school funding. So my understanding is the hold harmless or save harmless language is back in, meaning that reduction has been restored. That's my understanding. but that there still may be a cut as a result of the CPI or inflation factor that they're going to use. And so it's clear the governor is like a lot of governors, is focused on how much we spend on education, and we spend a lot in New York. There's no doubt about it. Whether you're for it or against it, you can't deny we spend a lot of money. I think this conference has always been ready to have real conversations about where we spend money, how we spend money, and is it the best way. But that's different because what she did and the way this formula works, it was going to cut a lot of, to be fair, a lot of Republican school districts, if I'm being very honest with you. And a lot of big Democratic districts, we're going to be just fine. That, to me, doesn't say we're solving this issue. That says we're going to apply a partisan solution to a complicated. These kids that go to these school districts aren't Democrats or Republicans. They're children. They're the future workforce of this state. That's how we should be looking at it, not in a partisan lens that this district is represented by Rob Ort, so who cares? Or it's a rural district, so it's all Republican, so who cares? They'll be okay with less. So I think if we want to have a conversation, then let's have a real nuanced conversation because it's a really nuanced issue. Short of that, I think the restoration, certainly of her cuts, is warranted. It seems that part of that's been done, but I'm getting the sense that there are still maybe some not so happy education news, which is why I think you also haven't seen anything on that front because they know that their allies, the Democratic allies in some cases, and the teachers unions or other education folks are not going to be happy about what they see.
And she said that the idea is to send it to the Rockefeller Institute if you all may have them do a study this year. Do you think that's worthwhile? Do you think that's where the conversation needs to happen?
Sure. The Rockefeller Institute, I'm sure they have good people that will study this and do a white paper, but you're not going to just find some think tank. This has to be a conversation with elected leaders, with parents, with teachers, with superintendents. This has to be this is not just some academic whips up a white paper and says, here's your solution. If that was why don't we do that on every issue? We don't, thank God, and we shouldn't, because these issues are a little more complicated than sometimes that person, there might be some good information in such a study, but that cannot be the final determining factor on what we do with education aid. It wasn't how we came to this point, and I don't think that's going to be the sole silver bullet out of something like this.
So outside of the cyber attack, what has the majority actually communicated with you in terms of time? Of when they plan to vote, if they told you, when they expect to have bills outside of the cyber attack? Or have they not?
That part. They have not. They have not. They have not told us. Initially, we sort of heard leaked out Thursday, Friday, but that was kind of really unofficial, right? That was not something that I heard directly from the majority leader. The majority leader told me on Sunday that she anticipated a long week. We had a frank conversation about this last week at the West Point luncheon. Very, very, very nice conversation, but very forthright. And she was adamant that she didn't think they were as close as maybe the governor and some other people wanted it to be. And while I think we're certainly closer, it is evident that whether it's internal or, between the leaders or what have you, that we're clearly, up until maybe recently, we have not been there. And so I don't know that they know exactly when we're going to vote, right? I think that's the issue. We were hopeful that maybe see bills today, but obviously that's not going to happen. So now you're into tomorrow. Again, for me, as frustrating as it is, and as my members, we're going to be here. We're prepared we came here to work this week. And we would like to go home. While we may not have a budget that this conference supports or wholly supports, we think we should be able to go home and say we have a budget at least. That there's a budget in place, that a school district maybe doesn't have to lay off 47 people now. Maybe you only have to lay off 20 or none. So there are real implications to having a budget in place. And I think not having one, again, is really somewhat insulting to those folks who depend on us to do our job in a timely manner. Oh, I'm sorry.
You mentioned mixed messages receiving on the hack. Are you getting briefed on this by the majority leader directly?
No.
So
No. Staff. her senior staff, my senior staff. We saw their public comment, was put out. I would expect, and I am expecting, a actual update, a real brief. And that doesn't have to even be for the majority leader, because I don't know if it was me, that I'm a cybersecurity expert, right? But I'd like to hear from somebody. I'm sure there's someone in this building that this is their job, or this is their responsibility, and I would like to hear from that person as to what the level of significance of this was. And not only for this, I mean, we should be lucky it's only bill drafting, meaning the state of New York should be only lucky it's bill drafting. It could have been something far greater, and as I said today, I was in local government. I can tell you most government, I can't speak for the state completely, but most government websites and government online infrastructure is probably far less secure than we would like to believe. Hacker groups today are so much more sophisticated. You could get and it doesn't have to be an overly, it doesn't have to be another nation-state actor or someone like that. It could be a group of college kids, quite frankly, that are able to do something like this. And so hopefully we can find out who it is. That's very difficult, as you probably know. But I have not had a direct briefing as far as what happened, what's the risk, what was the result of the attack, and again, where are we on the bill drafting piece specifically?
And then do you have any comment on the law enforcement shootings that have taken place in all these areas?
I woke up this morning and I literally was almost like, wait a second. I thought, is this a different shooting? Because the circumstances at least were similar. Traffic stop, and we've seen this now 3 times. Officer Diller, Officer Jensen, Officer Husak, and now the Albany officer, who thankfully is in stable condition, and I think it's fair to say is going to survive. But that's like luck. That's the reality, right? I mean, I've been shot at. It's kind of luck. And so Officer Diller and the other 2 in Syracuse and Jensen and Husak, they weren't as lucky. That's what happened. They just weren't as lucky, and they were killed. But no one can tell me that you've had 4 officer shootings within a month, 3 within 36 or 48 hours in upstate cities. And you can't tell me that there's a problem here. There's a problem, and we as elected leaders need to own it, some of us need to own our role in creating this idea that law enforcement is the problem, that it's us versus them. Just yesterday, and I wasn't going to say this, but I'm going to say it. Just yesterday, 2 of my colleagues, Senator Jackson and Senator Salazar, who I don't really know personally, I know them as colleagues, they had a press conference about getting rid of qualified immunity. The day after, 2 days after, 2 police officers were gunned down and killed. They thought that this is the time. We have a late budget. We have no budget. We're weeks late. We can't figure out how much to tax people, how much to spend. And you know what? We had 2 dead officers. I bet now's a great time to talk about qualified immunity and getting rid of it. That's where their focus is. They are so anti-police, they can't even pretend. There were images in the concourse of John Oliver talking about police brutality the day after 2 cops are dead. Now, how tone deaf is that? Maybe I live in a different world. Maybe I'm starting to think I just live in a completely different universe. Because when I go home, that is not what people are talking about. They're not coming up to me and saying, we got to get rid of the cops. Cops are the problem. You know what they say? Black, brown, white, we want safer communities. We want safer streets. That's what they want. They want safer places to live. And we're not giving that to them. And in fact, we're making the job of police officers much more dangerous, as evidenced by the last 30 days in this state. And anyone over there who denies that is full of it. They're lying to you, and they're lying to the people in New York State. And yet you don't see any real, I haven't seen a ton of statements. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable that you could have 3 cops dead in the ground, all young men, by the way, who leave behind families, who leave behind parents. That's how young they were, that their parents are still here in many cases. And look, I get it. It's a dangerous job, and sometimes things go wrong. But we know what the rhetoric has been over the last several years. We know that any time we talk about adding a police officer shooting or attack as a hate crime, no good, right? Anytime we talk about increasing penalties or making it easier for law enforcement to protect us, no good. In fact, let's get rid of qualified immunity. Let's hurt the cops more. Let's focus on something that most people have it doesn't affect their lives. It doesn't affect their lives. It's a political talking point to further divide this state between criminals and people who break the law, because I'm 44 years old. And generally speaking, my contact with law enforcement has been very limited. Why? Because I'm not breaking the law on a regular basis. That's why. If I'm breaking the law on a regular basis, then yeah, I might have a problem with the cops. They keep harassing me because I keep stealing things. That's how it works. It isn't, I don't understand why this is so hard for people to grasp, but it is a dangerous job. And these people who are killing these cops would think nothing. If they're going to shoot at a cop, would think nothing at shooting at you or me or someone else. So in some ways, the police officer is there to take the bullet, take the shot, take the risk so that you and I don't have to. That's why they exist, and obviously to put bad guys in jail and bad people in jail. And so we should be supporting them. We should be defending them. We should be standing with them. And you know who we're really standing with when we stand with them? We're standing with the people that they are protecting, our constituents who we work for. That's what it's about.